Welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive right in, because today we're looking at a massive 200-year rivalry between two medieval Indian superpowers. We're talking about a period that completely transformed the Deccan Plateau, an era defined by staggering wealth, some seriously brilliant military strategies, and, honestly, some of the most magnificent architecture the world has ever seen. So let's start with a really big historical question. Who exactly stepped into the sudden power vacuum left in the 14th century Deccan? You see, the Delhi Sultanate, which had previously expanded all the way down into the south, started to weaken. And that retreat? Well, it left the entire southern half of the Indian subcontinent completely up for grabs. Someone had to step up and take control. And as we're going to see, it wasn't just one power that rose to the occasion.
Two totally distinct empires stepped into the spotlight: the Vijayanagar Empire and the Bahmani Sultanate. And what makes the story incredibly compelling is that these two powers were born just 11 years apart. They literally rose up simultaneously to dominate the political landscape, kickstart massive international trade, and forge a legacy that was both incredible and, if we're being honest, incredibly bloody.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly cover the power vacuum in the Deccan, the rise of Vijayanagar, the rise of the Bahmanis, their systems of power, the Raichur-Doab conflict, and finally their decline and lasting legacy. All right, part one, the power vacuum in the Deccan. It is just wild how closely these two rivals mirrored each other right out of the gate. In 1336, the Vijayanagar Empire is established. Just 11 years later, 1347, the Bahmani Sultanate is founded. So you've got two brand new empires sharing a super volatile border, and they are both desperate to consolidate power in the exact same century. It was basically a recipe for spectacular innovation, but also inevitable disaster. Moving on to part two, the rise of Vijayanagara. So, founded by two brothers, Harihara I and Bukaraya I, with the guidance of the sage Vidyaranya, the Vijayanagara Empire was really built to resist the Delhi Sultanate and protect South Indian culture. But the empire hit its absolute peak under a brilliant military commander named Krishnadeva Raya, who ruled from 1509 to 1529. This guy defeated the Bahmani successor states and the Gajapati rulers of Odisha. But he wasn't just a warrior. Actually, he was a massive patron of the arts, wrote the Amukta and supported Telugu and Sanskrit literature. We even have accounts from foreign travelers, like Domingo Paez, who visited the capital at Hampi and wrote about being totally in awe of its unbelievable wealth and scale. Okay, so how did they manage all this prosperity? It basically comes down to the Nayankara system. The king was the ultimate boss, but he assigned land to military chiefs known as Nayakas. In return, these Nayakas maintained armies, collected taxes, and ran the territories for the empire. It was an incredibly efficient way to manage a massive military force. We're talking infantry, cavalry, elephants, and artillery. But definitely keep this system in the back of your mind, because that exact structure, it would later become a fatal weakness when those Nayakas got a little too powerful and started acting semi-independent. Which brings us to part three, the rise of the Bahmanis. Now, right next door, you've got the Bahmani Sultanate, founded by Alauddin Bahman Shah, with its capital first at Gulbarga and then later Bidar. This was the very first independent Muslim kingdom in the Deccan. And just like Vijayanagara had Krishnadeva Raya, the Bahmanis were elevated by their own uniquely brilliant figure, Mahmud Galan. Now, he wasn't the sultan, he was their greatest minister, basically the mastermind pulling the strings behind the scenes. Galan completely revamped the military and rolled out brilliant administrative reforms to divide the kingdom into provinces, which really helped control those overly ambitious nobles. He was also a huge champion of education, building the famous madrasa of Mahmud Gawan, which became an absolute beacon of learning for the whole region. Let's look at part four, systems of power. It's super fascinating to look at how distinct their cultural vibes were. On one hand, you have Vijayanagara, proudly preserving Hindu traditions, specifically Vaishnavism and Shaivism, ruling from magnificent Hampi with its towering Dravidian architecture. Then, literally right next door, you have the Bahmanis, an Islamic state reflecting Indo-Persian culture, ruling from Gulbarga and Bidar and building these gorgeous Persian Islamic structures with sweeping arches and domes. Despite these really deep cultural contrasts, they both lived, operated, and fiercely competed in the exact same Deccan geography. But underneath all those surface-level differences, they were structurally a lot alike, like two sides of the same coin. For administration, while Vijayanagara used the Nayankara system, the Bahmanis used the Taraf system, dividing the kingdom into provinces ruled by governors called Tarafdars. Economically, Both leaned heavily on agriculture and irrigation. But their trade networks were basically medieval versions of global supply chains. They were both massive players in international trade, exporting textiles and, crucially, diamonds. Vijayanagar traded spices with the Portuguese in Southeast Asia, while the Bahmanis imported highly prized warhorses from Arabia and Persia. They were just two incredibly wealthy, highly organized machines.
All right, part 5, the Raichur-Doab conflict.
So here is the million-dollar question. With so much prosperity, booming trade, and strong administration on both sides, why were they always fighting? What was the singular prize that drove these two empires into decades of bitter, exhausting war? Think of this as a high-stakes Game of Thrones-style clash, not just over a simple border, but for absolute economic monopoly over the entire subcontinent.
The answer boils down to one specific place, the Raichur-Doab. Basically, a doab is a tract of land right between two converging rivers, in this case the Krishna and Tungabhadra rivers. This wasn't just some nice farmland. It was the economic and territorial crown jewel of the Deccan. The root of their conflict wasn't actually just religious or cultural. It was driven by intense political rivalry and pure economic competition over this exact strip of land. Both empires absolutely needed to control it if they wanted to secure total supremacy. And finally, part 6. Decline and lasting legacy. Unfortunately, golden ages don't last forever. The Bahmani Sultanate was actually the first to crack, basically tearing itself apart from the inside. It all started with bitter infighting among the nobility, specifically between the local Muslims, the Decchanese, and the foreign nobles, the Afakis. This toxic court conspiracy ultimately led to a massive, tragic mistake, the execution of their greatest minister, Mahmud Gawan. Without his visionary leadership to hold things together, the empire just couldn't survive. By the late 15th century, the Bahmani Sultanate completely collapsed, violently fracturing into 5 separate Deccan sultanates: Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmadnagar, Bidar, and Berar. Now you might think the fall of the Bahmanis meant an easy win for Vijayanagar, right? No way. Actually, it set the stage for one huge, monumental year, 1565. This is the year everything changed for South India. 1565 was the year of the catastrophic Battle of Talikota. Those 5 fractured Deccan sultanates that used to be the Bahmani Empire, well, they put aside their differences and combined their massive military forces against Vijayanagar. And at the time, Vijayanagar was struggling with weak successors and its own internal drama. Remember those semi-independent Nayakas we talked about earlier? Yeah, that became a huge problem. The combined sultanate forces completely overwhelmed the Vijayanagar army. And the aftermath was absolute devastation. The grand, thriving capital of Hampi was systematically sacked, burned, and totally destroyed.
But here's the silver lining. Even though the empires fell, their legacy literally refused to die. It's cemented right into the architectural marvels they left behind. From Vijayanagar, we get these massive, skyscraping gopurams, stunning temple complexes like the Virupaksha and Vitola temples, and those iconic, intricately carved stone chariots. From the Bahmanis and their successors, we inherited breathtaking Indo-Persian architecture, vast domes, beautifully engineered arches, the imposing Bidar fort, and the famous, acoustically perfect Gol Gumbaz style in Bijapur.
These monuments aren't just old buildings. They're some of the absolute greatest treasures of medieval Indian heritage. Together, these two titans left an enduring mark. Their fierce military rivalry pushed the boundaries of strategy. Their trade expansion brought unprecedented global wealth into the subcontinent. And their cultural synthesis permanently shaped the urbanization, art, and history of the entire Deccan. So I'm going to leave you with this. When you look at the towering silent ruins of Hampi or Bidar today, which are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, by the way, are you seeing the violent end of an era? Or are you actually looking at the resilient foundation of modern Indian heritage? Think about that the next time you're exploring history. What other forgotten titans and epic rivalries shaped the world we live in today? Thanks for following along with this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.